Welcome back. We start? Yeah, we can start. Okay, apologize. All right, let's start. We are almost done. Uh, it always feels like semesters goes fast, and they do. We are at class 25 now, and we are just about done. So a preview of what comes next. A reminder: Saturday, 10:30, room 316. I will be going over the fall 2020 midterm. The fall 2020 midterm. If you haven't already, please take 90 minutes to complete that midterm before Saturday morning. If you just show up and you haven't taken it yet, this will not be a very meaningful session. It's not going to be recorded. Um, you'll be here live in person. I will stay as long as you need me to stay to answer all of your questions. So stick around, ask questions, and it'll be your shot. Okay. On Tuesday, the 18th of April, is our last substantive class. We may have noticed I only assigned one case, 15 pages. That was somewhat deliberate. I hope you use that additional time to start getting ready for what will come later that week. Are you wearing a tie, Brian? What's going on today? You're wearing a tie? What's everything cool? Good court or bad court? Good. Not like moot court, real court. Defendant. It's always good. It's never good when you're the client. That's why I always have being in court. All right. Well, I'm glad you're here. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. You're right. I didn't turn it on. I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Okay. Again, so Tuesday, the 18th, we have only one case. Hope you use that time to your advantage. On Thursday, the 20th, we have class. We don't have class. Let me explain what I mean by that. I want you to take one of my old exams. I'll tell you which one it is. It's the fall of 2018. Okay. Part 2. Fall 2018, part 2. You can do it in this room or you can do it at home. I don't care. You don't have to come. I won't be here. So if you want to take that time in this room, you can do it if not. But I encourage you to take that exam again, fall 2018, part 2. Give yourself 90 minutes. Okay. The reason why you should do that is that the last day of class, the 25th, that's a Tuesday, I will go over in class the fall 2018 part 2 midterm final exam. I'm sorry, the fall 2018 final exam. So I'm giving you 90 minutes to do it. If you don't use that, that's on you, not on me, right? So if you want to come here to do this room, you can. I will not be here. No, none of you will be here, I'm sure. But take time to do it at some point. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay. 10:30. 10:30. 10:30. It'll probably take, if I had to ask, I guess, hour 90 minutes. That's usually how long it goes. If you do it, also go over the memo and the Model A plus answer when you prepare, because I will address those things, but it's more useful if you sort of reflect on your own pace. And I'll talk about the exam in a minute, but I want to call on Kirk first.
Based on like the sign-up sheets that Bree may have shown you from the Langdale stuff.
He did not.
Oh, how many are in your day section?
How many students?
Yeah.
Like 60.
How many would you anticipate will come up?
Half. Yes, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. Why do you ask?
Caitlin on.
You don't need to bring donuts.
Well, what if there's an expectation from the full-time students? Then I'll feel socially as a pariah.
Yeah. What if someone has low blood sugar? What if there's a diabetic?
Well, if someone's a gluten intolerance, I don't know. What if someone's fasting? I don't know. Right? Look, I would probably guess like a 30, 40 max, but I don't know. And you don't feel an obligation to bring anything. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Okay. Of course they're allowed to come. No, no, no. I mean that. No, I mean that sincerely. I have two young kids. In a couple years, I'll have room to class. It's going to happen soon. So I'm cool with that. Um, yeah. All right. So let me just, yes, sir.
Are we not gonna go over the Cedar Point?
Of course we're going to go over it. That's class on Tuesday, what day is it? The 18th. You know, of course we're going to go over it, but it's just one case. So I made the readings deliberately light to give you more time to do the practice exams. All right, so let me go over at a high level, the exam, and all these are linked on the syllabus. If you go to the syllabus, I'm pretty sure I've linked to more exams than any other professor in the world. Right? No one gives you this many, I'm pretty sure. At least for the last 7 years or so, I've given you a couple documents, right? I've given you an A+ answer and a memo. And let me explain the difference between them. The memo I write when I prepare the exam. This is sort of like my grading guide. Here are the things I'm looking for, right? Here are the things that I'm going to be rewarding and giving points for. The memo isn't complete though, because after I actually grade the papers, I go back and revise the memo because, I don't think of everything. It happens every year that really smart students think of things that I didn't think of, and I always give credit for that. But the memo is something you should read very carefully because this is like getting inside Josh's brain, right? This is what I'm thinking when I'm writing the exam. The A+ answer is actually not a single student. What I do is I go through the papers and I pull out who wrote question number 1 the best, who wrote question number 2 the best, who had the most points in question 3, and so on. It's like a hybrid, right? So it might be like, 15 or 20 different people. I sort of merge their stuff together, right? As a consequence of that, I'm sorry?
No.
As a consequence of that, the word limit will be off, right? Because I'm not taking a single person's paper, so it will be more than 1,000 words. So don't flip out and see this, but I want you to see the best answer I can get. By the way, the A+ answer is not always perfect, right? There are some questions I ask where no one quite gets what I'm looking for, and they still get an A+. It happens, but at least gives you a guide of what I'm looking for. All right. Now I'm going to pull up the final exam from 2018, just for you to take a look at. Okay. So again, the final exam, you have 3 hours. Midterm, you have 90 minutes. So it's double, right? The midterm is basically half of the final. The word limits are very strict. I mean this. If you blow the word limit, I stop reading. Okay. So the final exam has 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. Not very creative, right? Part 1, maximum 1,000 words. Part 2, maximum 1,000 words. Okay. Yes, Zach.
Can we use 2 backslashes to comment out words?
No, there's no commenting. No. Words are words.
What if I have a really good pun that I don't want to include in your?
Save it. Tell me in January. Tell me in June, okay? Email it to me all after the grades are submitted. How about that? After the grades are released, you can email whatever the heck you want. I won't promise to read it, but no, I'm joking. I always read my student emails, but I don't. I had a professor, my criminal professor. He was not very good. He didn't make it. He washed out. He actually said for his exam, he said, "I will reward humor on the exam." He actually said that in class. Can you imagine if a professor said that to you? You'd be freaking out. I mean, what? You rewarded humor? What kind of idiotic thing is that to say? He washed out real quick. He did not make it more than a couple of years in academia. So yes, no humor. Occasionally, students put jokes. I'm like, okay, fine. You just wasted a few words. Good on you, right? But it happens anyway. The word limit's strict, right? So part 1 will have 5 questions, and part 2 is 5 questions. So if you have 1,000 words for 5 questions, that tells you should write roughly what? 200 words per question, right? So as you're going through the exam and you have 5 questions on part 1, about 200 words per. It's not perfect, but that's a guide for you to use. If you spend 500 words on the first question, by the time you get to question 5, you're out of space. And it happens every year where I see people run out of space and they just keep writing. And I don't read it. You get 0 points when you run over the word limit. Please don't do this, what I see sometimes. Students will just delete spaces between words to save words. You're laughing. I've had people give me an entire sentence that a single space. It's just one long word. It's incoherent, and you're breaking the rules. I mean, it's not cheating, but you're ignoring the rules I gave you, right? The reason why I have the word limit is to make it fair. Some students can write a lot, some students can't. This gives you an equal playing field that everyone's going to be measured up against. The word limit is the fairest thing. An essay exam with a word limit is completely unfair. Also, you have to pick the right answer, right? You can't just dump all the vomit you know, right? With an open book exam, you have to be judicious. Tell me the answer I'm looking for, not everything you know. All right, in the exam soft, to do a word count is actually a little bit tricky. This is a stupid feature which I hate. By default, it shows you a character count. You want to know what a character count is? Every letter, every space, every number is a character. So by default, it'll show you a character. And this happened at a midterm some years ago. A student wrote 1,000 characters because she panicked. 1,000 characters, like 5 text messages, right? A couple tweets. A student actually passed. So it actually wrote really good sentences. It was enough to pass, but not by much. Please write 1,000 words. The way you do it is you click this little document icon, you click that, it'll give you a word count. If you're planning to write by hand, don't. Please don't. Don't do it. You're gonna regret it. But if you do write by hand, you have to do a manual word count with your finger. Okay. I discourage people from handwriting for a lot of reasons, one of which is the bar. You will find that very few people write the bar by hand because there's a lot of typing. Your hand's gonna hurt. Get ready to take an exam on the computer. Whether you like it or not, it's coming. Make sure you do both parts of the exam. This happened during COVID, where it was on ExamSoft, and a student didn't click the next button, so she only wrote half the exam. Broke my heart. She did half the exam. Did a decent job too, and because of the pass-fail, she barely passed. But do both parts. All right. Again, so we're gonna get to timing. You have 3 hours for a final exam. What does that mean? You should spend 90 minutes in part 1. If you're at the 90-minute mark and you're not done with part 1, stop. Stop wherever you are and just move on. Because if you're taking difficulties on part 1, you're not going to finish part 2. Get your points. Just go to the easy stuff in part 2. Get your points where you can. Every year, I always see this where students have these really strong part 1s and they don't finish part 2. They only do 60% done and they don't do well. All right. That's why I'm urging you to take time to practice at home so you get a sense of how long this takes. The exam's meant to be taken in 3 hours or 90 minutes for a midterm. If you're finishing super early, you're either a genius or you miss something big. Maybe you're a genius, I don't know, right? Most people work till the very last minute. And don't leave early. I don't know who does this, but don't leave early. It's not worth it. All right, let me show you what the exam looks like. You sure you know this, but I'll go over it briefly. Oh, yes, ma'am. 200. Yes. 200, not 250.
But that's not strict. Like if you go over a little on question 1.
Correct, right. So if you put 300 words in question 1, make sure you have 100 words in question 2. But the problem, and I'll be very candid with you, you don't know how much space you need for question 5 when you write question 1. So if you spend all this time making question 1 very big, and you get down to question 5, like, oh man, I need to write some more stuff, you have to go back and delete. And you don't want to delete. That's the worst thing to do because you've wasted time. You don't get credit for stuff you delete. So I would force yourself to stop at 200. If you want to go back and add more later, but don't box yourself in, because I see it all the time. Question 1, 500 words, this brilliant answer gets 10 points out of 10, right? And then by the time you get to question 5, it's like 3 sentences because there are space, and they get like 3 points out of 10. Right? All the questions graded on a scale of 1 to 10. You want 10s, right? You want 9s. You don't want 2s and 3s. KC.
So if you do a word combination, what's that volume? You're grading.
I grade straight through. Yeah, I don't grade out of order. And, actually, let me make this point. I'll come back to your promise. Do you know how I actually grade? I don't grade a paper straight through. I grade everyone's question number 1, and then everyone's question number 2. But when I grade your question 2, I don't see your score on question number 1. I make it blind. So let's say you bomb question 1. I don't want that to affect how I grade your question 2. But let's say you did really well in question 1. I don't want that to affect how I grade your question 2. Each question is graded independently. So I'll grade everyone's question 1, everyone's question 2, everyone's question 3, and so on. So sometimes they'll say in a question, as I noted in question 2, I'm not going back. So if you reference a prior answer, it's as if you didn't write anything. All right, go ask your question, please.
Yeah, I think I was, deadline goal,
What was your question though?
but like, I was asking if someone, like, let's say you hop around, and I wind up getting to 1,000 words, but it was really about, like, in my head, my 1,000 words was question 1, and
I encourage you don't hop around. Don't do the bunny, right? And the reason why is the questions build on top of each other. So there might be something in question 1 that helps you with question 2, and so on. If you hop around, you'll lose that. So I would encourage you to go through the questions sequentially as I present it. And in fact, some years, part 2 is a continuation of part 1. The facts actually carry over. If you try and do part 2 first, it won't work. And I'll tell you the instructions. Please do this in the order I give it to you. So no hopping.
Is it possible to get a hard copy of the test?
Yeah, one of my students asked me that this morning. I will inquire. If I can get you hard copy, I will, because I know the screen is not the ideal for everybody. I'm with you on that one. If you want paper, I will. I can't promise, but I will make an inquiry about getting a paper. Yes, Gene.
Can you scroll back up? That's, the exam part.
Dude, this was my exam from 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, this is from 5 years ago. We're cool. He's panicking, right? Yeah, okay, no, this is my exam from 5 years ago, in 2018. All right, so let me just walk you through it. The first thing you should do, I know this sounds really dumb, but do it very carefully, is read the instructions, right? I know this sounds, of course, read the damn manual, as they say. Why? It'll tell you some important information. For example, this says I'll make this bigger so you can read it. It says the courts in this jurisdiction apply all American common law rules. That's good for you to know. So you're not applying modern rules, right? It says statute of limitations, 5 years. That's good to know for adverse possession questions, right? Yes, sir.
are we gonna get a paper, copy of the,
What did he just ask?
I don't know.
Hey, AJ, you want to tell me you just asked about 30 seconds ago? Yeah, and what did I say in response to his question?
I was looking at how many lines of text.
My answer is I will make sure, I'll try to get you paper. I can't promise, but my request will be for paper, okay? Okay there. Okay. Read the instructions first, right? Very important to read the instructions, and so on. Okay, always read the instructions. Okay. I'll tell you, for example, it's a race notice statute. Okay, that's useful for you guys to know, right? Information that you need to know. All right, so then we actually look what the questions look like. What I do is I give you these very short fact patterns, which might be 4 or 5 sentences, where I'll tell you something about this is in fee simple, and then there's a covenant and commercial purposes and so on, right? And then I tell you there's a lawsuit. How should the court resolve the dispute? Right? That's your money, right? You learn in legal writing, IRAC, CREAC, whatever, right? All these different things. All I care about is the analysis. That's what I care about. That's what I want to see. I want to see the analysis. And the analysis is grounded in authority. Cases. In X v. Y, the court held this. This case is similar to Smith v. Jones because of so-and-so. This case is different than Smith v. Jones for these reasons, right? I want you to ground yourself in authority. As you look at the model answers, the A+, you'll see they all cite cases and they discuss them, right? You can't just say, these 3 cases are relevant, period. That's not a very good sentence. I don't need you to do issue statements. I know what the issue is. I asked you. I told it to you. It's in a few sentences. I don't want rule statements. Why? You have an open book exam. You can just copy those. Those are not useful for me. The conclusion is always stupid because it's restating what you already said. I want the analysis. Okay? Again, this is not how all professors ask you to write exams, and unfortunately, different people have different requirements. I have no answer for that, but that's how I expect you to do it. Well, the conclusion in Iraq is kind of just restating what you already said. It's not very useful in general. You guys, you noticed that already, right? Yeah, you came to that conclusion. By your second year of law school, Iraq becomes a crutch. It's just not something you really need to use.
On your exam, just a brief conclusion of court should rule this way. That's enough for you, right?
Well, that's actually answering the question. I'm glad you actually asked that. If the question is how should the court rule, like your first sentence should be the court should rule for A, or the court should rule against B, right? That's actually answering the damn question, right? I can't tell you how many people never actually answer the question. They tell me all this good stuff about adverse possession, and they don't say the court should rule for. So go ahead, answer the damn question. Read the instructions, answer the question. All right, so you have question 1, question 2, the fact pattern, and they're short, right? But I would encourage you to spend maybe 20 minutes reading those exams straight through. Don't start writing for 20 minutes. The reason why is that there might be some information in the exam on question 5 that helps you with question 1, right? No promises, but sometimes there's some overlap, so you might learn something. Question 5 is what I call the policy question. For example, discuss what role courts should play in scrutinizing land use regulations, right? A question about race, socioeconomic status, and so on. When you're answering the policy questions, I'm not just asking whatever you think is a matter of policy. I want to get authority. So talk about Mount Laurel. Talk about Kilo, right? Talk about Lucas. Talk about the case for today, Koontz, right? How should courts go about scrutinizing land use regulation? We've had a lot of discussions. As you study the model answers, you'll start to see what I'm looking for. It's not obvious perhaps right away, but you'll get the sense. Okay. Again, time is important. You have only 90 minutes per each part. If you go over 90 minutes, you stop. You go on to the next one. And the word count as well. Don't go 300 words on part 1 because you don't know if you need those words later. You never know what's coming up next. The policy one usually is always very tricky. You're going to need words at the end. You don't want to be short in that one. Because statistically, every year, the 5th question is the shortest. It happens every year. Yes, sir. 5th one's always policy for both of them.
Policy towards the end, like say for adverse possession, when it refers, think about it, balancing settle title within.
I don't think I understood your question. I'm sorry. Want to try again?
I'll figure it.
You sure? Right. The policy questions are designed to make sure you're paying attention in class, because those questions will come from any commercial outline or Horne book. This is based on things we talked about in class, and it's sort of recreating our discussions. Those who are not always listening in class, good luck. Anyway. All right, again, take 90 minutes for Saturday and do this. If you haven't already, if you don't, then that's your call. But please try it. Zach?
When you say discuss, do we need to ultimately pick a side or just like,
I'll sometimes ask you, state the strongest case in favor of X or state the strongest case in opposite of X. Sometimes say, what are the pros and cons? With discuss, I don't think you have to take a position, right? It's not like, what will the court do? Okay, the court rules for A or B. This is pretty open-ended. Okay. Everyone okay with the, I know I just threw a lot of stuff at you. Everyone okay with what I just said? All right. Yeah, it's a weird thing in law school where your entire semester comes down to a 3-hour exam. It's a weird thing. I know I asked you about grading midterms, having the midterms got you were not so eager about that either. So the alternatives maybe aren't so good, but that's what we have now. All right, ready to go on to today's material? Yeah, no, we're almost done. You'll be done with me in a couple classes. You'll quickly forget about me. Something like you are. All right. So let's go on to today. These are the notes. I just pasted in what we did last class, so I don't have to type the entire thing again. But we have a number of decisions we've studied so far that don't always cohere. Let's just walk through them. Hadachek was the Brickyard case, which held that harmful noxious uses can be prohibited, no mandate to pay compensation. Penn Coal was a regulatory takings case involving a ban on mining coal. That regulation went too far, therefore compensation was provided. Penn Central involved the tower over the train station. Again, that was a balancing test where there was a large focus on what sort of expectations you have that are backed by investments. Okay. But Loretto was of a different category, right? Loretto was not a balancing test. It was a bright line categorical rule that if there was a permanent physical occupation, there was a taking. Compensation must be paid without any regard to the public's interest or the extent of the taking. Okay. Lucas imposed another categorical rule where if the government deprives you of 100% of the value of your property, compensation must be provided. But several years later in Tahoe Sierra, the court limited Lucas and said that framework only applies when the taking is permanent. When it's a temporary regulation, there's no categorical taking, and you apply the Penn Central test. Okay. And we have this massive flow chart, which just sort of gives you all nightmares. But when you're given a question on the takings clause on the exam, unfortunately, you have to sort of walk through this. Okay. The easiest question is there's a permanent physical occupation, in which case Loretto is your test. There's no balancing, it's a categorical standard. What if Loretto doesn't apply? Well, there are a couple possibilities. One of which, if you're in the had to check realm, there's a harmful, noxious use, police power controls, no compensation. But if there's a permanent economic deprivation of value and there's no common law nuisance, you win under Lucas, but that's been very rare. Usually when all else fails, we go to Penn Central and you lose. So that's like the game of life. There was shoots and ladders. You're always going to go down to Penn Central no matter how high you go. You're always going to hit craps. All right. Everyone get that background. Nothing new, just recap. We have two cases for today, which are more recent from the Roberts Court. The second case, Horne, the raising case, doesn't fit exactly on this graph, but if I were to place it, I would place Horne in the same category as Loretto, where there was a permanent physical occupation where they literally took the guy's raisins, and that required the payment of compensation. Our first case, Koontz, which involves the exactions doctrine, doesn't fit in this chart at all. Maybe it might be number 3. I don't want to put on it to make your chart even worse, but it doesn't really fit anywhere. Okay. All right, questions so far? Okay, who wants to give me the facts in Koontz? Koontz.
I was hoping to do Horne, but I can.
All right, Chi, go ahead. I'll save the raisin case. Like raisins?
I do not, but I use Horne a whole bunch in a moot court argument in undergrad, and so I'm pretty good.
Okay, I'll let that one go. Chi, you can have the first case, please.
I think land in Florida, we want to build on three stuff.
Okay.
So we request a permit for that. We request that he's gonna give up about 14 acres for the easement to for drainage and whatever else the state needed. The state denied it and wanted to propose two alternatives. Either reduce his plans to build to 1 acre instead of 3, or pay for renovations to another site that belongs to the state to help out on that. And he could suit it, saying that that was a taking because if he didn't take that offer, then it's a taking. He wanted to.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that, Chi. All right, so there's this doctrine in law. Did you say this in con law, unconstitutional conditions? I don't teach it, so there's no reason, probably why you could learn it either. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you apply to live in public housing. Let's say, fine, we will give you a public housing apartment, but by taking this apartment, you consent to random drug tests. And we can search your apartment whenever you want. No warrant, no Fourth Amendment. We can just search your stuff whenever we want. Can they do that? You might say, well, you don't have to take a government apartment. The courts have said you can't do that. And the idea is when the government conditions some benefit on surrendering a constitutional right, be free from search and seizure. That is an unconstitutional condition, right? You cannot condition some government benefit on surrendering a constitutional right. All right. And this doctrine has been used in the property context as well with regard to the takings clause. So we have these two cases, Nolan versus California Coastal Commission and Dolan versus City of Tigard. And these involve cases where the government put conditions on property rights. So what happened in Nolan? In Nolan, you had a guy with beachfront property, and he applied for a permit to build or to renovate a bungalow, a cabin on his beachfront property. And the government said, okay, sure, we will give you this permit, but you must grant an easement to the government to allow people to cross your property onto the beach. All right, Nick, you okay? Okay. You can't see the bottom? Yeah, I'll scroll up. That's fine. So in the Nolan case, good. So in the Nolan case, again, California said, we'll give you a permit, but you must, you must give an easement to the government, which allow the public to cross. All right. Can you do that? Supreme Court said, no, you cannot. That is an unconstitutional condition, right? Why? It's basically extortion, right? They're saying, oh, really? You want a permit? Good. Give us this valuable resource and we will give you the permit. And the court said that the government cannot extort people for their property rights. That's called an exaction. E-X-A-C-T-I-O-N, an exaction, right? It's an unconstitutional condition. The government cannot condition your right to have protection for property rights on surrendering your property interests. I mean, what if the government just said, can you give us an easement on your property? They have to pay for it. It's eminent domain. But here, California tried to on the cheap with having to pay for it. The second case, Dolan v. City of Tigard, was a little different facts. You had a guy who owned a store in Oregon somewhere in the City of Tigard, and he wanted to expand his store. He wanted to pave a parking lot and put a pave paradise for a parking lot, right? He wanted to put up a parking lot on his land. He also happened to own some land nearby, near a creek. The government said, okay, if you want to pave your parking lot, you must give us what's called a conservation easement. You must dedicate this land to be permanently green. You can never build on it. And the property owner said, what the hell? This is mine. I'm not giving you anything. Supreme Court agreed. Supreme Court said, that's right, that there's not a close enough connection between paving a parking lot and giving an easement on a nearby creek. So Dolan and Nolan put out this test. It's sometimes called the nexus test. You know what a nexus means? A connection, right? A link. By the way, Lexis, nexus. Lexis is law. Nexus is connection. Connecting to law. You're welcome. Right? Yes. The wheels turn. You're welcome. Blew your minds. Right? So it's often called the nexus test. And what is the nexus test? It's a lot of jargon, right? But it basically says the government can only put a condition, right, when that condition is related to what the property owner wants to do. Stated differently, the property owner wants to do X. Whatever conditions imposed must have some relationship to X. So in Nolan, the guy wanted to renovate his bungalow. Allowing an easement for people to cross his beach property had nothing to do with the renovation, right? The renovation was building a house that in no way affects whether people can access the beach. Same for the Dolan case, right? The guy wanted to pave his parking lot. What on earth does that have to do with dedicating a green conservation easement nearby? Not much. There's a relation, but it's not good enough. So with this unconstitutional condition doctrine, we ask, how close is the fit? How close is the relationship between what the property owner wants to do and what the government demands. And if there's not a sufficient connection, a nexus, a proportionality, the condition is unconstitutional and compensation must be provided. At that point, it's just straight out extortion, right? The government just extorted an easement from the guy and they got to pay for it. It's an exercise of eminent domain. All right, everyone with me? Now, the Koontz case is different, though, right? Koontz volunteered to give a conservation easement, but the government said that is not enough. That's insufficient, right? Why? They wanted something else. They wanted money. No, you're not paying the government money. You would pay money to contractors who would do some green wetland work nearby. Okay. Did the Nolan and Dolan line of cases apply to money exactions? The Supreme Court said yes. Right? The court said there's no functional difference between demanding an easement and demanding the value of an easement, money. Right? And so the court said this was too far, that you couldn't demand money being paid. Specifically because the money wasn't even being paid on Koontz's lot. Right? The money was being paid for lots nearby to improve. I'm sorry? The government. The district, the river, the water management district asked for Koontz to pay these contractors to do this other work. And by the way, these are probably contractors who are friends with the county. I'm just saying that's probably, yeah, she's laughing, yeah, smiling. Right? When the government says, please support contractors, you know who they want to hire. I don't know if you guys saw what happened with Papa's restaurant and the Hobby Airport. Have you seen this in the news? He's smiling. So if you've been to Hobby Airport, you ever know there are a lot of Papa's restaurants. They have Papacitos, they have Papa Steak, all the Papa's restaurants, right? And it's been that way for decades. The city of Houston had a contract bid to solicit bids of who wants to run the food at Hobby Airport. And then after this lengthy process, it was a Spanish company, some European company won the bidding process. So they'll have all these new restaurants at Hobby Airport. So Papa's, which is a big restaurant in town, filed a lawsuit. And know what the allegation is. So there's a period of the bidding process called the quiet period. And during this period, the government is not supposed to talk to the bidders, right? It's supposed to be just quiet, that no one has any improper communication. So apparently, the phone rings at the Papa CEO's office one day. And some guy says, hello, I'm from Mayor Sylvester Turner's office. I'd like to talk to you about the bidding process. I want to tell you about some of the bids are. We have some information to share. And oh, by the way, this guy has already been convicted of bribery. So the suggestion by Pappas is the phone call is meant to solicit a bribe. Help, right? Am I describe this one correctly? Yeah.
And that whole Houston airport section is pretty,
Yeah. So yeah, when the government says, I want you to help my friends and I want you to hire some contractors, you know exactly what's going on. So the first part of the court's opinion was, it doesn't matter whether you're giving an easement or giving the money value of the easement. The takings clause, the exaction still applies. Okay? So everyone get that part, right? Whether the government demands an actual easement or they demand the money value of an easement, there's still an exaction. But there's a tricky part of this case. I want to just focus on this for a moment. In Nolan, the government actually took the easement, right? In Dolan, the government actually took the easement. So there's a taking. And where there's a taking, you have to pay just compensation. But in Koontz, did the government ever actually take the property? No, because he never went along with it, right? There was no actual property taken. So hold on a minute. If there's no property taken, there's no violation of the takings clause. And if the takings clause is not violated, there's no just compensation. So what is the measure of damages? What is the remedy for violation of Koontz? The majority doesn't really answer this question. And Justice Kagan's very upset on this point in dissent. She's like, what are we doing here, right? There was no property taken, so there's no just compensation. Why are we giving them money? So maybe the answer is state law provides a remedy for an unconstitutional exaction. but it's not clear that Florida law does. So this entire case went through the courts for years and years and years. And at the end, Koontz got his money, but it's not clear for what, right? Because there was no taking. So one of the weird parts of monetary exactions is that no land's actually taken. Therefore, there can't be any just compensation paid. So any damages are a matter of state law, not as a matter of the federal constitution, Fifth Amendment. Okay. Questions on Koontz? Well, look, Justice Kagan says this in her dissent very clearly. There was no property ever transferred, so how can there be a taking? No money changed hands. No easement was granted. Where's the taking? Where's the beef, right? Where's the taking?
I mean, that's the dissent. But
Majority doesn't really disagree with that point.
I thought you said that because the money was in view of
But the money was never actually given, though.
the
The threat, right? What the majority says is there was a demand for money, and that demand imposed an unconstitutional condition. But the majority does not say that that condition violated the takings clause because no property was taken. You see that point?
I so, but I thought you said
Check it.
it's not the taking of the property itself.
It's unconstitutional, right? Florida violated the Constitution. I agree with you. But Florida could not have violated the takings clause because they didn't actually take any property. In other words, the unconstitutional conditions doctrine in this case isn't actually premised on the government taking the property. It exists even if the government never takes the property in the first place. Maybe called a due process violation or something else, but it's not actually a takings clause. The majority is very ambiguous on this point. And just to go background, this is a case where Justice Kennedy joined the conservatives, right? As a rule of thumb, when Kennedy joined the conservatives, the opinions can be crap, right? They were always trying to keep 5 votes together, and it's always sort of incoherent. So the court doesn't actually explain why this unconstitutional condition is unconstitutional. They don't actually say. And they if you read carefully, they actually agree with Kagan on a lot. It's actually they're much closer than they seem. The big difference, though, is that the majority thinks, oh, maybe there'll be a remedy under state law. Let's remand it. Let the state courts figure it out. Kagan says there is no remedy, right? If the money was never actually handed over, what's the damage? Right? All they made at most was a demand.
But they still didn't approve it.
They never approved it. Yep.
So what were they trying to accomplish? They never approved it because they wanted the money. But because they didn't get the money, they didn't approve it. But if they
Yep.
got the money, they would have approved it.
Right, but the denial of a permit isn't unconstitutional, right? It was the demand that would be. Right. Okay, let me put it this way. The majority said that the demand was unconstitutional. You agree on that one?
Yes.
But then what's the remedy for that?
I said to refer them to a state.
Right. Go back to state court, but I'm asking all of you, right? What's the remedy if the government violates the Constitution, right? It cannot be just compensation for the value of the property because he still has the property, right? They didn't take it. He still has 100% of his land, right? So the only measure might be if state law allows a remedy for imposing an unconstitutional condition, which it doesn't. So it's a weird case where even when you win, you don't actually win anything. But in the end, we know there's a note after the case, which I know you all read, right? And the note after the case says the Florida court just gave him damages. They basically ignored what the Supreme Court said. Yes, sir.
Would they not have just compelled them to give him
An injunction, right? So that was actually referenced by Alito briefly. They didn't talk about it. In my view, that could be a possible remedy, right? To just give him the injunction. But still, Florida law requires some mitigation. So maybe you could order them to go along with his plan. That is, give those other 11 acres and then give him the permit to build. He could still use it though, right? Even under Penn Central, he still has all use of his property. You just can't build on it, right? I mean, if he wants to argue that there's a taking under Penn Central, he'll lose, right? There's not a complete diminution of value. He gets to keep it, right? He just doesn't get to build on it. Under Penn Central, you lose.
I mean, I realize that we're learning taking, but aren't the majority of conservation easements voluntary compensated?
I don't know. Are they? You tell me.
Well, I mean, because I remember earlier, when you talked about easements, I brought up the idea of scenario where he's surrounded by a bunch of property owners
Right.
that had probably sold their land to government under a wetland easement. And this is the one guy that's.
They didn't get, yeah.
And he's doing the converse, instead of something conserving the land, he wants to pave it. So the government steps in essentially and stops him by way of the permitting process. But I mean, what we're gonna run into on the general standpoint is federal easement programs are voluntary.
Mhm.
Like landowners aren't compelled to enter into an easement program.
I don't know how to answer your question. I'm not sure. I don't know how common these are, and I don't know if those are actually the facts here, but
Okay.
maybe. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
I just see a federal easement program as more like a federal subsidy program.
But why is this federal? This was a state program.
Well, it's under the same office as a federal wetlands conservation program.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, Kirk. All right. More questions on Koontz. Yeah, Talia.
So just for like, separate. For zoning exams.
Yeah.
Figure out
Monetary exaction. Right.
So in the. That's where you would look.
Excuse me. No, I don't think Koontz even falls on this chart. I said Horne does. Horne, the raising case falls into Loretto. Excuse me. I don't think Koontz falls on this chart at all. It might be number 3.
So basically just make sure you pay attention to see if there's
Right.
actually.
It would be a mistake to call Koontz a regulatory takings case because they never took his property. Right? He never brought a Penn Central claim. The entire case turned on the claim that they demanded this easement or they demanded this money. Everything was on the demand, not the actual regulation of the land. It was on the demand. So it's a weird case because in Nolan and Dolan, they actually got the easement and then he wanted to get paid for it. Right? But here, no money was handed, no land was handed. So Kagan's like, what are we doing here? The Kagan opinion is very easy to read. She's an excellent writer, by the way. She and the chief, best 2 writers in the court. No, third place is a distant third. And when Kagan's in dissent, she's a joy to read. So I actually found her dissent, persuasive. She raised some good points. How you feeling? All right, still coughing? Still the COVID?
No, it's like I got a sinus infection.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well, hope you feel better. Okay. All right. Any other questions on the Koontz case? It's a weird case because there was no takings. Right? That's why I would call it an unconstitutional conditions case, right? The demand the government made was an unconstitutional condition, and you can't do that, which implicated the takings clause because what they were asking for would have violated the takings clause. They never actually got it. Right? So, I mean, imagine the facts were different. Imagine the government said, hey, Mr. Koontz, we want you to pay money to these contractors, we'll give you a permit. And let's say he went along with it. And he said, you know what? Screw this, right? I have my permit, but I regret paying these contractors. Let me sue you. That would be different, right? Because he actually paid the money. But here, the money never changed hands.
So can you say that this is an exactions case that does not meet the Nolan and Dolan?
Yes, it's a monetary exactions case that does not meet the Nolan Dolan standard. You could say that. But this case doesn't fit anywhere. In fact, this book was actually removed from the last edition of the case book and they put it back in. I think it's actually a good case to teach, but it doesn't really fit anywhere. It's not Loretto, it's not Penn Central, it's not Lucas, it's nothing. It's an exaction case. The Nolan Dolan cases sort of stand on their own. They don't really fit anywhere else. I'm sorry? I didn't say that. Don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say that. I didn't say what you said. Okay. Questions on Koontz? Zach? Facts? Raisins?
All right, let's talk about these raisins.
Some of these raisins. By the way, everyone, I know this is an obvious point. Raisins are dried grapes. Look, not everyone knows that. I pickles or cucumbers and okay, you're trying to Zach, raisins, go. Whining comes from students. That's where. Go on.
So supporting the White House Memorial Training Act 1937, the Secretary of Agriculture can make orders and regulations governing specific agricultural markets, in this case, namely raisins. Part of the legislation surrounding raisins specifically entails the government taking large swaths of raisins off the market and using the raisins in other non-competitive markets, donating them or disposing. Some profits from this government market are used for administrative fees, and the remainder are returned to farmers whose crops have been taken. Just throws me reach ago, reason on his race become doesn't did not set any raisins aside for Jackson. When the Department of Agriculture came knocking at his door, he quickly started to give them nothing. Incensed by his insolence, the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, hold on. Incensed by his insolence.
Yes.
That's in your outline for the case.
Yep.
All right, continue.
I wrote this in undergrad when I still had fun. Incensed by his insolence, the Department of Agriculture issued a fine for the market value of the grapes, just shy of $500,000. Or over $1,000. Petitioner has now sued on the grounds that the department is violating his Fifth Amendment rights by trying to take his raisins.
All right, very good. Thank you for that college level, Zach. No, that's good. It was actually very good. I mean, that's a compliment. It was actually, if you're doing this in the undergrad, I didn't say Supreme Court case in undergrad. I didn't. All right, true. All right, so the majority opinion was written by the Chief Justice. I know I give the Chief Justice a lot of grief, but when John Roberts is in his zone, no one's better. So I just want to play a little audio if I can. This is the Chief Justice announcing the opinion of the court. They always read a summary of the case, so just it's brief. Okay, I'll just pause it there. So if you ask the Chief Justice, this sounds very sort of evil, very nefarious, that in the dark of night at 8 a.m., the trucks pull up to seize this poor family's 1,000 tons of. I mean, how many raisins is 1,000 tons? That's like a lot of raisins. I don't know. I just anyone's farmers in the room. Is there an Aggie here? That sounds like that's like a lot, right? But really, the facts were not so nefarious, right? It's actually a family. The Hornes were aware of this policy. They knew that the trucks were coming. So it wasn't like a raid. And he simply decided not to participate in the program. Now, the facts of this case may remind you of a famous con law case. Anyone know what case I'm thinking of? It's mentioned a few times in the case. What's that wheat case called? Wickard v. Philbert. Very good. Right. Remember the facts in Wickard. The government sensed that there was too much wheat on the market. We're in the middle of a Great Depression, so of course, the thing to do is to limit production of food. Of course, right? This is economics back then. So the government said we're going to restrict the amount of wheat grown, and you cannot ship in interstate commerce any excess wheat. And of course, Philbert did. It went to the Supreme Court. It was upheld. Fine. But there were a lot of these similar programs where the government said we want to restrict the supply. Okay, why are they restricting supply? The supply goes too high, prices go too low, and the farmers might be injured by the low prices. They might go out of business. So in order to prop up farmers, they determine the exact amount they'll produce. And this is not done solely by the government, right? There's actually a committee of farmers who come together and make estimates and forecasts, who decide how many raisins should be grown. So basically the farmers decide for themselves how much they'll create. If there are excess raisins in the market, the raisins are then sent overseas or to different markets or even destroyed. The idea is we can't have too many raisins on the market. Now, sometimes if the raisins are sold, there's actually profit and it's returned to the farmers. So when the government came with their pickup trucks to pick up all the raisins, maybe Horne would have gotten some money, maybe not. We don't know. And year by year, the actual answer varies. Okay, so what happens next? Horne hated this program. He called them a bunch of communists, right? He did not like these people at all. And he sued, arguing there was a taking. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that there cannot be a taking because personal property, that is chattel, raisins, are not protected by the takings clause. The takings clause only protects real property. And this holding wasn't, out of line. There was some dicta in the Lucas case which suggested that takings of personal property would be subject to less scrutiny. But the Ninth Circuit made another argument as well. They said that Horne did not have the value of his property taken 100%. Right? There was not a permanent physical occupation in terms of Loretto. Wait, didn't they seize the raisins? Well, yes, but there was a future interest. Right. There was actually a future interest that the government might pay some money for the raisins. And because there was a future interest, there's not a 100% diminution in value under Lucas. There's not a permanent physical occupation under Loretto. At most, there might be a partial taking. And then the Ninth Circuit said, but wait a minute, the money you get might actually be your just compensation. The government's compensating you for the value of the raisins. So what are you complaining about, right? Stop complaining. This is designed to help you. This is designed to stabilize the market. And if there's any leftover money, you'll get paid. So what are you complaining about? The Supreme Court did not agree with the Ninth Circuit. So the first part of the opinion said, what? The takings clause governs personal property, chattel, raisins. So you have to still satisfy the Supreme Court's cases, even if they're taking private property. Roberts had this good line. It's like saying, they seize your car, but they give you the quarter stuck in the cushion, so that's okay, right? Again, Roberts, when he's in the zone, no one beats him. No one can touch him, right? He had this great line about let them drink wine. I love this line. It's my favorite. It's my favorite Roberts memes ever. This is my top 5. So, so of course, this is the Marie Antoinette line. Let them eat cake, right? We all know the line. So let them drink wine. Again, the chief, when he's on his mark, no one can touch him. When he's off his mark, drives me crazy. All right, so this goes to the court. The first part of the court's opinion actually split 8-1. Right, it was a 5-4 case. But this was an 8-1 issue. The majority plus 3 of the dissenters argued that the takings clause governs real property as well as personal property. And I don't think that was very controversial, right? That was not a controversial holding. The harder part's what comes next, right? What is the remedy? Now the dissenter said, wait a minute, they're getting compensated, right? They're getting the value of the raisins. Some years not. And maybe it's the case that the value of the raisins is the just compensation. The dissenter said, let's remand the case, right? Let's send the case back to the Ninth Circuit and let them figure out the appropriate measure of damages. The Supreme Court said, no way. Right? This case had already been to the Supreme Court twice, and they didn't want to waste the Ninth Circuit's time with another rounds. They said, we'll just end this here. What they said is, the government said the raisins are worth X dollars. That's your compensation. That's what you have to pay. End of the case. And the dissenter says, why are we rushing? Why can't we let the process work its way through? I think the Supreme Court sort of gets impatient, and this case has been around for almost a decade or more. They want to get rid of it, and so in the end, the court held there was a taking, and there had to be paying of compensation, which is the value of the raisins. Zach?
Question I have about the papers that I read actually. It's civil asset forfeiture work with respect to the takings clause preventing them from just taking stuff.
All right, so civil asset forfeiture, what is that? So let's say that you're a drug dealer and you're dealing drugs in the back of your car and the cops arrest you. right? What happens to the car? They'll impound it, and they will seize it from you. So there's actually an exception to the takings clause, which says property seized that's used as part of a crime is basically contraband. She is nodding his head, right? And if you seize it, you're not required to pay compensation. So you ever go to a police auction, right? Where'd all that crap come from? They seize it from criminals, right? Yeah. Yeah, Zach.
Following that, it's actually not necessary that the person be convicted.
Nope. Nope. You're absolutely right. And the property doesn't have to even belong to the person who's arrested.
So how does that square with this?
There's a good argument that civil asset forfeiture is unconstitutional. So I'll give you a couple of egregious examples. There's one I remember. So there was a grandmother. Her grandson was living with her. The mom was out of the picture, and the grandson was dealing drugs on her porch. So of course they seized the grandmother's house. The grandmother wasn't part of the drug deal. She wasn't connected. I don't think she even knew the drug deal was going on. Maybe she did, but she wasn't part of the drug deal. And they basically seized the woman's house, and they put it up for auction. So there's a very strong movement in this country to sort of rein in civil asset forfeiture, but the police don't like that. Why do the police like civil asset forfeiture? I hate to keep calling you, but
The most recent cases now we're doing is like one more vehicle versus
Yeah.
homes. It's a lot harder to seize a home than.
hold on. He said it. Why do they like civil asset forfeiture, sir? Money. It's a profit maker for the police.
Yeah, the city sells those cars at
Auction.
and it goes straight to the city.
Yeah. Government.
They like.
Yeah. So you ever see signs like these sports car for auction? Okay, private jets. Yachts. Right. All this other stuff. Okay, these are the implements used in various crimes. But to Zach's point, you don't have to be convicted to have your car forfeited. Being arrested is sufficient.
Allegedly used in
Right. There was actually a Supreme Court case involving a guy who was driving around in a Land Rover, and he was busted for dealing drugs. And I think his sentence was like maybe $10,000 or $20,000. That was the fine he had to pay. And they basically sold a $70,000 Land Rover, and they kept the difference. And the court said that was unconstitutional. That the value they took was actually an Eighth Amendment violation. The unconstitutional fines. They basically fined him. It was like a $70,000 car for like a very small actual penalty he had to pay for dealing. He was dealing pills or something. Good question though. All right. So again, to reiterate, the holding in Horne is actually pretty straightforward. The personal property, the reasons were subject to the takings clause, and the mere fact that they could have possibly received some revenue from the government was not just compensation. The compensation was money that actually would come from the value of the raisins. Okay. Questions? All right. That's all I have. Let me wrap up a bit, and you guys can go home and or back home, but at least go get something to look at. I'm trying to be respectful. All right. So we have this ghastly flow chart, right? When you approach a takings question in the exam, you'll need to walk through this. And so say, yes, there's a permanent physical occupation. No, there's no noxious use. You have to walk through this. Okay, Steve. I'm sorry? If it's Loretto, you stop. You don't go on. But I'm going to, be ready for, she's asking us on the exam, right? Be ready to go through the entire run of the chart. Okay. Well, you can, but that's not going to be enough. You're going to have to say, under Lucas, compensation is required because there's a permanent deprivation of economic value and there's no harmful noxious use under common law. You need to tell me why Lucas applies. You can't say, if you just say Lucas governs this case, okay, that's partial credit. They explain why Lucas governs this case.
I mean, the one that we know, like if you saying go through, like can we just
well, if you think about it, you're going to need to do it, right? Because in order to get to Lucas, you have to say that there is no harmful noxious use. And that's as defined by Hadachek. So really, there's no way to avoid it. You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I listed them at ABC. each of them requires talking about harmful, noxious uses. So you basically have to talk about Hadachek. You can't. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to bank your points, you got to talk about it. I think if you read the Roberts opinion, Horne fits under Loretto. Because he's basically saying it's a permanent physical occupation. They're literally taking the raisins in their trucks, right? They're driving with their raisins. That's permanent. That's not. I mean, look at Lucas. You keep the land there, right? But you can't use it. Here, you've lost your chattel. You never get it back.
Well, I guess my question was like, for Horne, the takeaway is that like personal property also can be,
And it's not. But also, they're seizing it. They're seizing the personal property. That's why there's a taking.
but like it can be governed by the takings clause,
Correct.
not just real property. So
Correct.
that we could say like, in that would kind of be like a beginning statement if it was a fact question in regarding.
Yeah. Right. But again, not all seizures are unconstitutional. For example, fentanyl, right? If the police raid someone's house and they seize their fentanyl, you can't say, well, that's a taking. It's pay for my fentanyl, right? There's a long line of cases saying that the seizure of contraband is not a taking. Right. So it has to also be a lawful use. That would maybe go under the noxious use element, right? You think about it. Or if the government decides to ban different types of weapons, well, that's not a taking. Now it's illegal. I've been involved in some of that litigation. It's not pleasant.
So lawful.
It's tricky, but yeah. Yes, sir.
So if they really took the ratings and instead,
If they gave them all these, they have all these options of what they would do with the raisins. Only one of the options said we might give you some compensation.
All right.
But if they would have took the raisins and said, no matter what, we'll give you a little compensation, would that
Under the Roberts Court, there will still be a taking.
still be
That now the taking might affect what the just compensation is, but there will still be a taking. The taking was literally when they put it on the truck, right? When they show up at your house with a pickup truck, they put it in their bed. That's the taking. What happens after that goes to compensation.
I just didn't know if that was, if they say we're gonna give you something. No matter
Still a
what,
taking.
It's not 100%.
That's what the Ninth Circuit said. The Ninth Circuit said the possibility of future payment means it's not a taking at all. And the Supreme Court rejected it. The Supreme Court said the actual act of removing the raisins is the taking, period, end of sentence. Okay. We done? All right. I'll turn on the exit poll if you have any comments for me. Otherwise, I shall see you Saturday morning. If not, I shall see you Tuesday. And we shall have a lovely end of the semester. We are almost there. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. Which guest was that?